Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session on the Panchayat Raj institution. I've been active on urban issues for over 2 decades now. I've always maintained that we have a constitutional defect at birth. When the constitution was framed, there were clear definition of the first 2 tiers of government, the central and the state, and you had the concurrent lists and the state lists and the like. But when it came to the 3rd tier, unfortunately, the term that was really used was local bodies. And it was really not a 3rd tier of government per se. It's one of those constitutional defects. And 45 years after independence, after a few multiple efforts, there was an earlier attempt, etc., we finally got the 73rd and the 74th Amendment. The 73rd dealt with rural panchayats and the local self-government out there. And the 74th, which has its own deep flaws, was for the urban areas. So we thought it prudent for BIC to consider doing a session to assess how the Panchayat Raj institution and this act has worked over 3 decades. And today, we always say we have an eminent panel, but trust me, today we really have eminent speakers. So we have T.R. Raghunandan, who will walk us through the genesis. Actually, the genesis of this local government was in Karnataka during Abdul Nazeer Sab's regime, which actually got adopted as central. He was also the joint secretary in the Panchayat Raj ministry. So he's going to give us a flavor in terms of the genesis and the central thinking that brought the act to be. So each of the speakers will speak for about 15 odd minutes, and then we'll have a panel discussion where I'll play the idiot in the room, asking some very basic questions. He will be followed by Uma, who's the additional chief secretary of the Panchayat Raj RDPR in Karnataka right now. And she will give us a flavor in terms of how does it operate today, what works, what doesn't work, and what could be improved. And our last speaker will be Vijendra Rao. He's also a BIC member, Washington, World Bank, lead economist, scholar, author. He has studied this, provide us an outside-in perspective in terms of he has looked at the 73rd quite closely. I think has also got a lot of anecdotal stories in terms of what he has seen as being success stories and also maybe failures. So he will give us an outside-in perspective, after which we'll go for the panel discussion. So Raghu, if I could request you to providing us a perspective on how this came to be.
Thank you very much. Ravi put my biodata from my other life. So a lot of you must be wondering what a chap who's restoring cars is going to speak about decentralization, but this is also something else that I do. I used to be in the IAS. I got obsessed with democratic decentralization, found it a fascinating subject, so quit the IAS to pursue that interest. And today I'll speak on the history of local governments and decentralization. Now the first thing is that the word decentralization is a word that can be stretched to mean many things. So sometimes you could have an argument or a discussion with somebody, and both of you are actually talking about 2 entirely different concepts when you mention the word decentralization. So let me just focus on what I understand by the word decentralization, what I believe the Constitution defines decentralization as. Decentralization comprises of, broadly, and Biju will bear me out, this is a very sketchy way of saying this, but there is deconcentration, there is delegation, and there is devolution. Deconcentration is when a central authority appoints a branch office. Like the district collector is a deconcentrated entity of the state government. There is no district collector budget. The district collector is the state government at the district level. Delegation is when you appoint an agent and you get the agent to perform your delegated responsibility. So if you have the Karnataka State Health Mission or you have the District Health Society, it's a delegated agent. Devolution means something completely different. Devolution is about different levels of government. Now I often hear the word, people say local governance. No, local governance can mean anything, because even a district collector is part of local governance. But local government is completely different from local governance. Governance is what somebody does, but a local government is a level of government. Now, whether its level of government is hierarchically below the state or the union is a matter for discussion. There are different countries which approach it differently, and that is seen in how the architecture of the intergovernmental relationship is defined. In South Africa, they are called spheres of government. They are not called tiers of government, which means that the local government is no less autonomous as the national or the provincial government as in undertaking its tasks at the lowest level. Now let us talk about the history of what evolved in India, and you'll realize why it is such a fascinating talk. Subject. You see, I'm not going back to the days of the Mughals or even prior to that. We all know that villages existed as autonomous republics with some kind of a panchayat, a group of elites in the village governing it and combining in themselves power and authority of legislation, execution, and also as the judicial. I would say that, well, you can say that Madras municipality is the oldest municipality outside the British Empire. I think it was in the 18th century, 1780s or something like that. But if modern Panchayat Raj or decentralization as we see it happened in 1889 when Lord Ripon came out with the first moves towards decentralization. It wasn't democratic decentralization, but it was the beginnings of democracy. In a sense, you had elected district boards. So if you go to any old Madras presidency or Bombay presidency, if you go to, for example, if you go to Anantapur, you will see the district board building. These district boards are very powerful. In fact, they used to run everything, including secondary schools and colleges and all that. They were fairly devolved, and that is the first level, first time that Indians got elected to governments. In fact, it's important to note that the Congress Party in 1889, they began with a demand for greater strengthening of self-government. And for a long time, their demand was not for complete independence. For almost 2 decades, it was more about empowerment of the sub-national levels of government, the provinces and the district boards. Now, when you come to the constitutionalization, everybody talks about Ambedkar. And a lot of anti-decentralizers quote Ambedkar, who denounced Indian villages as cesspools of caste and inequality. And this is actually very wrong. People who have read Ambedkar, anybody who talks about this hasn't read Ambedkar. It's very important that Ambedkar made a speech on 6th of October, 1932. Important date. 6th of October, 1932, he was arguing against the introduction of the Panchayat Act in the Bombay Presidency. And he made a speech in the assembly. And this is what he said. He said, I should like to say at once that I have no objection in principle to the policy of devolution. If it is found that the local boards of this presidency are overburdened by the functions which are placed upon them by the Local Board Act, I say by all means institute village panchayats so as to disburden the local boards. So he said, yes, we must have panchayats. But he said that I am bound to insist that if these village panchayats come, there shall be special representation for the minorities. At any rate, there shall be special representation for the depressed classes, and others, of course, will speak for themselves. His worry was that if you did not provide special dispensation and special reservation for depressed classes and minorities who are otherwise excluded from governance, then the panchayats would be a manifestation of the cesspool that he mentioned Indian panchayats, Indian villages were. So he did not oppose panchayats. He opposed panchayats that did not provide for these provisions, and that is exactly what the Constitutional 73rd Amendment did. Now let us jump to what happened at independence. Now at independence, a very interesting thing happened. That as the Constitution was being written, a gentleman called Sriman Narayan, who was a Gandhian, I think he ended up being governor of Gujarat at a much later date. Sriman Narayan wrote a book saying the Gandhi's vision of the Indian Constitution. It's out of print. I read it in the Parliament library, fascinating place. And got into the habit of reading in the Parliament library because my boss was Mr. Manishankar Iyer, who once berated a minister because he told me, he said, I don't like that minister because he does not know the difference between a concerned individual and an individual concerned. So when you have a boss like that, You jolly well need to read. But this is what Sriman Narayan said. Sriman Narayan said in this book, for which Gandhi wrote the foreword. And Gandhi's foreword was, I haven't read this book, but because Sriman Narayan has written it, I endorse everything in it. Signed, Noakhali. Poor Gandhi was actually in Noakhali at that point in time, dealing with communal trouble. What Sriman Narayan said was that there will only be one election for all of us. We will elect our local representative in a panchayat or municipality. They will form an electoral college which elects the members of the state legislature, and the state legislature members will form an electoral college which will elect the MPs, and therefore there will be an organic connection between the three levels of representation, and they will therefore recognize their spheres. But that was not to be. Strangely enough, who implemented this? Not in India. It was implemented by Ayub Khan when he seized power and declared martial law. And that brings me to an interesting side point I want to make, that actually dictators have been known to have better track records on decentralization, on strengthening local governments, because they often do it to legitimize their martial law. So that's exactly what Ayub Khan did. He created local governments, empowered them. They were called union parishads. And if you go to Bangladesh, even today, you will see that the original union parishad buildings were all built during Ayub Khan's time, where the local elected representatives formed the electoral college for electing the president of the country, which was naturally him, because they were all grateful to him for having been given these positions. But of course, this was not accepted, and it was virtually at the last minute that Article 40 was introduced, which is a directive principle which said that the state shall endeavor to create village panchayats, not panchayats at the district or the taluka level, only village panchayats. And there it lay. Ambedkar inserted that on the insistence of Rajendra Prasad, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was tipped off by, I think, Srinivas Shastri, who was a MP from Mailaduthurai. Then, subsequently, what happened was, community development started in 1957. When community development started, and S.K. Dey, who was a technocrat, was brought in to create the community development blocks. A need was seen for local participation in community development. So the Balwantrai Mehta task force was created. Balwantrai Mehta was the chief minister of Gujarat, and the task force was delivered its report, which recommended a 3-level administrative structure. But it was actually not a report about local government. It was about involving people in community development, and a participatory structure was created. And finally, Jawaharlal Nehru accepted it. I would say that for Jawaharlal Nehru, this was as big an internal policy as strengthening of agriculture and building of big public sector undertakings. This is not recognized. So Jawaharlal Nehru, on the 2nd of October 1959, inaugurated Panchayat Raj officially in this country, in the constituency of S.K. Dey. He was a Bengali who stood for election from Rajasthan in Nagaur, and in Nagaur a lamp was lit. There was a South Indian minister who was very enthusiastic, and he wanted Nehru to come down to inaugurate Panchayat Raj, but Nehru could not do that. So this minister went to his constituency on the 6th of October, the same date many years later, 6th of October 1959, and in Nalgonda constituency, he lit a lamp to inaugurate Panchayat Raj in South India. And that minister's name was P.V. Narasimha Rao, who later became the Prime Minister and enacted the 73rd Amendment. And earlier that day, another event happened, which also has great bearing on the history of Panchayat Raj in this country. I was born early that morning on 6th October. But anyway, Panchayat Raj flowered for a bit, but then with the Chinese debacle, and in 65, after the Pakistan war, it died. The Indira Gandhi years was completely bereft of Panchayat Raj, except for a small spark of Panchayat Raj happening in West Bengal, where the left front decided that they would do two things. They would do land reforms, which would change the economic position of people of classes, and they would give jobs for their boys. It was a very deeply political exercise. And they created panchayats so that their cadres could get ensconced in the new change circumstances, the social circumstances. Then in 1977, the Morarji government appointed the Ashok Mehta committee report. And to my mind, that report actually makes far more sense in terms of the design of Panchayat Raj. It was probably, in my opinion, the first report that talks about local government. Local government. And it's also very interesting to read the two dissenting opinions on the Ashok Mehta report. There was EMS Namboodiripad who said this did not go far enough. And there was MGR who said this has gone too far. You must read those two because it tells you the kind of political tensions that are inherent in the whole idea of devolving power, not just creating agencies, but of devolving power. And then we had Nazeer Sab's experiment. I was very fortunate to have worked in that time. Nazeer Sab and Ramkrishna Hegde were brilliant. I remember meeting Nazeer Sab for the first time as a young officer, and he told me, he said, young man, you're dreaming to become a collector, we're going to destroy all that. And I kind of disliked him. But later on, when I spoke to him, he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant, except that he smoked 40 cigarettes a day, so you would get asphyxiated just sitting in his presence. And what he did was, he disempowered the district collector. The IAS hated him for that. And he made and because the IAS are creatures of seniority, so he made the chief secretary of the Zilla Parishad. They hated him for also using the name chief secretary for the district entity. And he made the chief secretary senior to the district collector. So for example, I served as district collector of DC, Bangalore rural district, and I was the chief secretary of Zilla Parishad in Hassan, where Shivasailam was at DC. He's few years junior to me. I'm not saying that's part of the hierarchy, but you know what it means, no? In the whole IAS mindset, these things make a big difference. So he was making a bold statement. But what was very important was a fiscal architecture he created. He carved up the state budget into two parts, into the district sector budget and the state sector budget. And he called every department and told them, this much, you tell us what are the schemes or your programs which you are going to devolve. And to that extent, finance will follow function. So the horticulture department had 20 schemes, and they said that 8 schemes would go to the Zilla Parishads. Those 8 schemes were placed in the district sector budget. The budget was carved up, and that money was carved up and given to the district panchayats. And without computerization, without anything, we used to get the money in our bank accounts, and we had pretty much freedom about deciding what to do with that money within the confines of the scheme. So it was not agencyfication, there was devolution. And at the end of the year, there was a brilliant section in the Act which said that whatever money lapsed, whatever money remained unspent, we could put it into a basket and use 10% of that for schemes of our own creation. So we were doing it. I would not say that we achieved a great deal in terms of social indicators. But there was a great closing of the infrastructure gap. The minor infrastructure gaps in local service provision in schools, hospitals, etc., I think that was a period where Karnataka just surged ahead of many other states because there was freedom and flexibility given to the local world. The IAS did not like it at all. Poor Abdul Nazeer Sab didn't survive very long. He passed away, and then there was a downhill slide. At the end of 1992, after the first term of the Zilla Parishads were over, on one fine day, Shiva, that was after you were transferred, they reversed it. The IAS won the battle. They reversed it, and it stands reversed to this date. They superseded the Zilla Panchayats, appointed the district collectors, district deputy commissioners as administrators, and appointed senior people back there. So when a lot of bureaucrats tell me that, oh, it's all political. No, sir and madam, it's not political. It's all about preserving your hierarchies and turf. We must understand that the creature called a district collector is something the British gave us. They invented this for the colonies. You will find them only in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, India, Pakistan, etc. They are smart enough never to have district collectors or deputy commissioners back in old Blighty. They don't have them. That was invented for us, and we are the biggest museum of defunct British institutions. In fact, the British, we should organize tours for them to come and see how they used to think a century back. So that was what happened here. Order was restored and it came back. Then, of course, we had the 73rd Amendment, which I don't know, Mr. Manishankar Iyer says it was an accident because it happened on the same day that Babri Masjid was pulled down. Everybody's minds were on something else. But it is remarkable, it's also very strange that Rajiv Gandhi's government, which had a 4/5 majority in parliament, could not muster a 2/3 majority in the Rajya Sabha to push the 64th and the 65th amendments. And then Narasimha Rao, with a minority government, was able to cobble together a consensus to pass it. Remarkable. It's a remarkable political task. And this is something that I find absolutely remarkable. All of us think that parties are polarized, but you should see the champions cutting across parties, sitting in different parties. Just to give an example, when I was in the Rural Development Ministry, in the Panchayat Raj Ministry, which was a newly created ministry at that time, that was the time when the Rural Employment Guarantee program was being passed. And believe me, nobody understands these things. That was a remarkable process of political consensus. The law was introduced by Manmohan Singh in Parliament because the UPA government has said that it would be done within the first 100 days, and they did it. And immediately he said that there must be a joint select committee that will be appointed. And guess who was appointed as the chairperson of the joint select committee? A man I love to hate. Kalyan Singh was made chairman of that. And I began to like him, Forget about everything else. But we appeared many times before the committee, and we all knew that the entire Rural Employment Guarantee program had come from the NAC, which was spearheaded by Sonia Gandhi, etc. But I found a remarkable congruence between the way that Sonia Gandhi thought and Kalyan Singh thought. Nobody would like to admit that. Kalyan Singh is no more, but I am sure both would not like to admit that there was a remarkable congruence of thought insofar as the design of the Rural Employment Guarantee program was concerned. The Rural Development Ministry did not want to give the job to the panchayats. It was Kalyan Singh who endorsed section 13 to 16 of that act, which says that minimum 50% by value of the works under that program has to be given to panchayats. And Uma, you realize to what extent that empowered the panchayats. It is still considered to be one of the best conditional cash transfer programs in the history of the world, if you look at the scale and the method by which it is given. So there was a lot done at that time. There was a remarkable political consensus. But where do we stand now? We've enacted the laws. It is said that the amendment is weak because it gives states the leeway to determine the nuances of devolution. But I was a consultant to the 14th Finance Commission, and we were asked to look at all the laws of the states, and we discovered that as far as the core sectors were concerned, education, health, sanitation, water supply, rural roads, rural infrastructure, etc., there is very little to distinguish the acts of Punjab or Haryana, which are considered not to be so strong on decentralization, from the acts of Karnataka and Kerala. In fact, I would say the Kerala Act is actually quite conservative in terms of wording. Where the difference happens is at the level of the Zilla Parishads and of the Taluka Panchayats. Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh, they do not want strong Zilla Parishads. Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka have always liked to have strong Zilla Parishads. The Panchayat Samiti is very strong in Himachal Pradesh, in Rajasthan, etc. So there you find a divergence. But as far as powers given to the Gram Panchayat is concerned, there's a broad consensus across all the states. So I don't think that the Constitution amendment being weak is an argument any longer. Where it is weak is where the fiscal decentralization has not been operationalized. Abdul Nazeer Sab's scheme of carving up a state budget to ensure that certain allocations of the budget have to go to the panchayats to the extent that they are devolved those actions has eroded in Karnataka. I will present it later during the panel discussion. I have the data with us because we did research on it. It is best implemented in Kerala, where there is a development fund which is given to the panchayats, and it is completely transparent. So I can now check and find out that in my panchayat in Kerala, Mankara Panchayat, which is not a very great panchayat, we have about 2.5 crores of untied grants with broad do's and don'ts within which we can plan. That is still devolution. But is it complete devolution? No. I think that we have settled into a very low equilibrium level of decentralization, which does not constitute devolution. And I'll tell you where the greatest failing is. You might find a few states like Karnataka and Kerala have walked, as far as functional devolution is concerned on paper, I think all states have done reasonably well. That is no longer under question. When you come to fiscal devolution, separate budgetary windows, I think exist now only in 7 states. And even in a state like Karnataka, the allocations under that window have completely eroded. It is now at about 17%. It used to be almost 30% at one stage. Departments have slowly spirited away the flexible funds and kept it back with them. So that is where we stand on fiscal devolution. On fiscal devolution, tax collection is very important at the local level. Tax is collected by the panchayats only in a crescent. It's basically Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, Kerala, Karnataka, Goa, Maharashtra, Gujarat, this crescent. No one else collects any tax at the local level. Karnataka does pretty well actually on taxation. I think we probably have some of the best regimes of local panchayat taxes. But where every state fails is there is no civil service under the control and superintendence of the panchayats. And that the civil service at the state and the national level are squarely to blame for that. You cannot run a government without its own civil service. You cannot. You go to any part of the world, you go to Nepal, the local governments hire and fire their staff. Here, the staff resist being placed with the panchayats, and whatever you say, you can sugarcoat it in whichever way you want and say that no, we will give them some control, minor punishments, blah, blah, blah. No. There are 14 tasks in the of 14 points of control and superintendence over a civil servant, starting from recruitment to finally settling the pension payments. Right? It includes leave, management, promotions, punishments, transfers, etc. On none of these, no state works. So that is the reason why we have settled into a low equilibrium level where on paper there's a lot of functions with the panchayats. Fiscal decentralization is bad. Few states have done okay, but even those states are slipping, and there's virtually no devolution of any organizational capacity. Go to Uttar Pradesh, you will find one panchayat secretary working for 9 panchayats. There are 52 panchayats, 52,000 panchayats in UP. And it has the oldest Panchayat Raj Act in the state, 1948. Enacted before the constitution was enacted. So I'll stop at this point in time. We can get into this in greater depth, either if we talk about Karnataka or nationally at a later point. But this is where we stand at the moment. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I have the difficult task of speaking after a terrific speaker and before another terrific speaker. So I'll make a few points, such as I have. But bear in mind that Biju again is going to be very interesting to listen to. But before I get into talking about Karnataka, there's something I wanted to say. This is the 30th year of the 73rd Amendment. And on Panchayat Raj Day, which was April 24th, I messaged one of the senior colleagues, senior civil servants who was associated very closely with the conceptualization and with the enactment and so on. And I said, what do you think? Congratulations on having come this far, but what do you think? So he messaged me back after an hour, and he said, thank you for your greetings. The journey of Panchayat Raj has been a difficult but interesting and ongoing process. And I just think all those 3 words are just so very right. It's difficult, as Mr. Raghunandan pointed out. It's difficult. It's very difficult. But it's interesting, deeply interesting. And there's no one who can say it's not an ongoing process. And so we need to keep all those 3 thoughts together as we look at it. In other words, is the glass half full or is it half empty? The glass is there on the table. It wasn't there on the table before. So that's the first thing. Of course, so this whole question of whether you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, there's a big difference. Biju, with the other session where we're discussing, there's a big difference between taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And 2. So that's the directional change. It's never going to be easy because who was it? Frederick Douglass, who said that nobody gives up power without a struggle. It never has happened and never will. But it's about sharing power, and sharing power requires not just people giving power, but also people asking for that power, grassroots. So that's one thing. So what are some of the things that have succeeded? In my humble, there are many seniors here, or Raghunandan sir, Shivachelam sir, others who are more deeply, who have been more deeply involved in this than me. But in my modest opinion, certain things succeeded, some beyond expectation. The very fact that, so all the states, I know that this looks like a small, low bar, but for low standards, but state election commissions have been set up. Elections have been held. The last elections in panchayats in Karnataka were held in December 2020. In the 1980s, a lot of people feel, when they talk about the old Mandal Panchayat Act, they say, then we had chief secretaries and today we have CEOs. That was important, but that was not the most important thing. To me, being a woman, bringing 25% reservation for women in all the seats out of nowhere, that was the most radical thing, among many radical things about that act. 25%. After 1947, after the independence movement, where were women in political empowerment? They were back in the 1980s, so 25% in Karnataka. In 1993, the constitutional amendment still mandated 33%, and states did 33%, including Karnataka. Karnataka increased that reservation for women to 50% in 2010. Today, people will say the decentralization hasn't moved forward. 20 states have 50% reservation for women. That's a very silent move forward. Nobody gives up power without a struggle, but if women are getting there, that's something, and that's not nothing. Elections held regularly. Representative committees, the institutional design for which we have to thank, for Karnataka, for example, we have to thank many of the very eminent colleagues here who have put their intellect and their heart and had consultations and thought about the intellectual design, the institutional design, and that's why we have a very fine act. And we have representation, which perhaps we don't have that kind of representation in urban local bodies, and that's important. FC grants, Central Finance Commission grants to local bodies, to rural local bodies, are coming. In the 14th Finance Commission, it was 100% grants. In the 15th Finance Commission, there are grants to 100% grants to Gram Panchayats. In the 15th Finance Commission, we have 85% grants coming to Gram Panchayats, 10% to Taluk Panchayats, and 5% to Zilla Panchayats. But net, we have substantial funds coming. The 15th Finance Commission has established some conditions, some conditionalities tied to sanitation and drinking water, because that's a big push of the government, and that's a big push locally as well. And more on that later. But the fact that these grants are coming, and the fact that MGNREGA, as Raghu pointed out, MGNREGA in Karnataka is of the order of 6,000 to 7,000 crores, which allows every panchayat to be dealing with about 1 crore of work. And MGNREGA used thoughtfully can be not only for water conservation and trenching and bunding and all of that and community assets, it can be like an untied grant for a panchayat, used thoughtfully and meticulously as per the guidelines. So that's something. So women, SC, ST categories, the hitherto unrepresented have come into. There are areas of disappointment. The district planning committees not functioning. The planning part needs to be strengthened. Participatory planning, local planning. State finance commissions need strengthening, not uneven across the country. But the biggest area where we need to do work, I wouldn't call it a failure, but where we do need to do work is about enabling the Gram Sabha to function as an effective democratic institution, and how do we do that? There are ways to do that. Today, with technology. Panchayats are also very weak in the poorest and degraded parts of the country. This is something that we need to really think about and talk about. And grassroots democracy has to reach those areas in better ways than we're doing right now. We need to think about whether the great push for economic reforms in the 90s, which has led us where we are, was accompanied by a similar push. Was there enough work done on governance reforms? That's something. Kerala is an outlier, as we know, but other states have also had limited mixed success. Karnataka is one of them. Own source of revenue for panchayats as a local government is very important. Property taxes in Karnataka, for example, just getting at a very micro detail, with a lot of support. Panchayats require support. They require support both technically, they require support in technology, in order to identify the base, property tax, all of that, and to collect them. So we have given, just to give an example, 4,000 POS machines to 4,000 gram panchayats, online collection through, you can pay your vegetable vendor through GPay, you can also pay your property taxes through GPay. So these things, still working on it. But taking the collection of current demand of own sources from 64% to something like 98%. That's today, over 4 years. That has happened with support. But it's not happened because of us. It's happened because the panchayats are out there wanting to collect and wanting to use their funds. Human resources. Again, Karnataka has done better than many states. We have provided both panchayat level staff, who are minimum wage employees selected by the panchayats, and also civil servants deputed to the panchayats. However, this whole question of dual control, I don't deny it's something to work on. And is the panchayat development officer, who's a pretty smart man or woman, directly recruited? Some of them come with MBAs, good interested in working, good ideas, all of that. But they do have dual control with the panchayat as well as with the CEOs, who are representatives of the government and who are always, under pressure to perform on state sector schemes as well. But having said all of the above, there are beacons, there are good performers almost everywhere in the country. And that's something. That's a big something. And that's something that we should cherish. But what could we have done better? Greater support, these are questions we should ask. As a society, have we supported decentralization in rural areas enough? Have we even looked at it enough? Has academia looked at it enough and studied it enough? Has the media looked at it enough and understood it? Even today, Biju, a couple of years ago, we interacted, remember, on Twitter, and some media person was asking me on my social media account about, but aren't panchayats very bigoted and this and that? And they were confusing a gram panchayat with a khap panchayat. Now that is a level of ignorance which is very, very unfortunate. So that is the kind of attention. Have we paid enough attention to panchayats? Civil society organizations. Again, the important role of civil society organizations in helping panchayats, facilitating them. We have, for example, a very strong social audit movement in various parts of the country. But are panchayats an easy target? Are we socially auditing big resourceful departments such as public works, say, in different states? So obviously not to condone any irregularities, but maybe the effort should also be to facilitate greater planning, greater participation, preempt procedural issues, and help people to participate better, because we do have illiterate and semi-literate populations, and they need to be able to find a voice. And how are they going to do it unless we actually help and facilitate that to make local democracy happen? So some silver linings, the potential of the panchayat development plan, because the panchayat is now able to have some funds and able to look at different sectors to create an integrated plan which is meaningful, which is not just looking at outputs or works, but is actually looking at outcomes. Localizing the SDGs, this is an opportunity. This should not just be a nominal thrust, but it should actually be because the SDGs will never happen unless they are actually localized. Unless we actually look at local communities and their needs for health, or whether we look at local communities and the needs for poverty alleviation, livelihoods. What is MG Nrega but a tool for enhancing people's ability to earn a fair income, a decent income? So localizing the SDGs, this is something on which panchayats can do, and this is an opportunity. And the third biggest opportunity which needs to be addressed is the potential of panchayats working with women's self-help groups. Women's self-help groups have been created as a parallel program of Government of India. But in states, is it possible to create bridges of better convergent functioning, where women as a collective come forward to work with the panchayats as partners, not as employees of the panchayat? And I'll give you an example. So solid waste management in rural areas is one thing that we are pushing. And a couple of years ago, when we were going around, we saw the poorest and most marginalized women actually doing the dirty work of segregating mixed waste. And we said, this doesn't work. They were SHG women, but they were just doing the dirtiest work of segregating the mixed waste, which shouldn't have been mixed at all. So we sat with a few people, discussed with the field, discussed with organizations, so on, and we said, what if the Gram Panchayat enters into an MOU with the Gram Panchayat level federation of the SHGs, and the SHG comes and does this as an end-to-end micro-enterprise and starts working. So today we have trained 16,000 women, and 9,000 of them are already working on this in green jobs. 1,800 women have been trained, and this is an area where the strength of the patriarchy really came forward, where there are these auto tipper trucks, these little trucks which are to be driven. And we said that the women will do this end to end, not just the work of segregation, which is typically regarded as women's work, but also, the end to end thing. And despite the reluctance of panchayats, despite the reluctance of some of our PDOs themselves to hand over the keys, once the women were trained and had their driving, 1,800 women today are driving those trucks, which is not a great number, but it's 1,800 out of 6,000 panchayats, which is considerable. And for each of these women, it has been a minor revolution, because there's a Kunbi woman from Uttar Kannada, who's the first woman in her community, in her remote Joida community, to actually learn to drive. And she is now driving in the panchayat, and so public spaces. So that's only an example. It's not, it's not everything. It's not nearly everything, but that's an example of the kind of work that we need to do. Nothing's going to come without work. It's not going to happen without us conceptualizing, finding out what might work, and so on. Some of the other areas, training and orientation of panchayat members. We conduct the elections, but then we have these face-to-face trainings which are kind of not thought about. They're done in a perfunctory way, and they're done over 5 years and so on. But during COVID, what we found, especially during the lockdown, was that we found that especially because there was a lockdown and state departments couldn't go, and we've discussed this earlier, panchayats swung into action. And when we said that for the first time we're going to experiment, this was in March 2020, we're going to experiment with giving you some orientation about what is COVID, all of that on YouTube. We were also experimenting. So we said, okay, one division, administrative division, there are 4 at a time. We didn't realize, we should have in hindsight, that we could have done all 4 divisions together. But we said, tomorrow morning, please sit in front of your computers and turn the internet on at 11 o'clock. And 10:45, we had people logging in on the live chat and saying they were there. So panchayats, based on the information that we gave, and during COVID, we conducted about 10 or 12 such sessions. What we created was a task force, right? The elected panchayat, along with them, the panchayat officials, all of them, and along with them, the community workers, the ASHA worker, the Anganwadi worker, the village accountant, maybe the police sub-inspector, maybe if there's a bank branch, then the bank. So we said, you are the task force. During these next few months of the pandemic, because we didn't know how long it would last, you will have to take all steps, preventive, mitigation, response, relief, everything. And this actually showed us how well they took to science-based awareness. So we had PPTs which we were showing, WHO information, this is coronavirus, this is how you protect, this is how you do precautions, and they translated it into rangolis on the ground and wall art and dangura, sending information to people. They created what you and I would call an escalation matrix if people aren't there, but they had all those things. They didn't need the jargon that we use. They just had all those solutions right there. That gave us the idea that we could use by the end of the first wave, and this is what my last story, with which I'll end because there's much more to be said. By the end of the first wave, as the first wave of COVID was dying out, we found that schools and colleges across the state were closed. And the libraries, as an exercise in decentralization, the rural libraries had just been transferred to our department the previous year. So we said, what if we use the libraries? There's so much anxiety among children, so much anxiety among parents about how kids will stay connected to learning. So we said, what if the panchayats use these libraries as learning spaces and turn them into vibrant open centers where kids with COVID precautions can come and either borrow books or read the newspaper, whatever. We also knew, because in RTPR we were also handling other calls, distress, that people were just getting tired of sitting at home and looking at each other and, the stress of being confined in small spaces. So people needed that space. And we started this program called Odo Belaku, the Fire of Reading. We said we'll do 4 things. All kids, rural kids, will be enrolled free of cost. All libraries will have a children's section. We'll have computers. And panchayats will be trained and oriented in how to do this, and they're free to do this in whichever way they like. And we said that, from the department, we can't give any money, but we can give training to the librarians. This is what we did. Today, 2 years later, and because of the panchayats, because of the way in which they took it forward, also because they had just been elected and this was part of their action-oriented training, we have 3.5 million kids enrolled in just 2 years, free of cost, as members of the libraries. And these are kids of people who are either illiterate or semi-literate or first generation, and kids who probably don't have a book at home. So this is an example of what a panchayat can do in a situation when they're allowed to do it. We didn't spend anything. It was all their funds. They chose. We didn't say you need to do branding of this kind. It needs to be this shape. It needs to be this. They chose the colors. Of course, what we did was we issued some enabling guidelines, and we did a lot of civil society partnerships, because civil society, there is a certain sense of involvement and so on, which the civil society partnerships brought, and that's what we did. So that's all I have to say. I'll stop at this, but look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
It's an honor to follow Raghu and Uma. I worked with Raghu first more than 20 years ago when he was Joint Secretary Panchayat Raj in the Government of India, and I'm working with Uma now. You got to see them, I see them as the two titans of the bureaucracy on Panchayat Raj in Karnataka. The remarkable work that they have done and are continuing to do is really a privilege to have seen up close. So I'm honored to follow them. I want to place this in a slightly higher context. Yeah? If we think about the process of development, whatever that word means, when you see the discourse around it, that discourse generally follows maybe 3 paradigms. The first paradigm is the neoliberal paradigm, if you want to call it that. Let's call it, actually, a better word is the liberal paradigm, which is free markets. Let's let the markets work. Let's have high rates of economic growth. That's basically what Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao brought to India under liberalization. And it generated remarkable rates of growth, which continues to this day. And there's a strong business support for that kind of thinking. The other one is what you might call the neo-Keynesian paradigm, which is the idea that you tax and spend in ways that equalize inequalities in the country, where you do land reform and all these things. And that's, again, there's a lot of left support for that way of thinking. NREGA maybe comes out of that way of thinking. It's been a very dominant paradigm throughout the world in development thinking. The third one is relatively new and relates to the Nobel Prize in Economics from a few years ago, which is this, what I call the neo-paternalist paradigm. We social scientists are so smart that we are going to tell you governments how to fix everybody by running experiments. Okay? We're going to run this experiment and that experiment. There are going to be books written on this. And people, love this stuff because they think that these are solutions that are going to fix the problem and solve India's problems. And so they get a lot of support from McKinsey. They get a lot of support from governments. And bureaucrats love it. Masuri, understand, is full of this stuff now. It worries me. Yeah, because what you're doing in all of this, the first two I think don't worry me at all. That's part of how development should be thought of. They're all both important. The third one worries me a bit. It's a tool. Yeah, Experiments are a tool, but they also empower the top rather than the bottom. Because they tell the bureaucrat what to do, they tell the politician what to do rather than the citizen. Then people will object and say we can do experiments on citizens, as I have done. But that's sort of, a byproduct of a larger paradigm. What is the paradigm that Panchayat Raj represents? It's the paradigm of the people. It's what I've called elsewhere the reflexive paradigm, where we bring ideas of citizens, the enormous amount of power, energy, thought, intelligence that exists amongst with the ordinary citizen, to bring to bear on solutions to their own problems. That was Gandhiji's vision. And there's a long history of that vision in the Indian context. It goes back, Raghu alluded to it, thousands of years. The idea that ordinary people can come together, make decisions that affect their lives through cooperative process of discussion and solution building and collective action is an old idea in our subcontinent, across regimes. Goes back thousands of years. I can give you examples of it from the Arthashastra if you're interested, but I won't do that. Yeah. So, this idea we've sort of somehow relegated to the sidelines. Yeah. This is why, as Raghu said, this took a long time to even become a thing. Gandhiji was the biggest champion. Village Swaraj was a tremendously important book of his. Yeah? Still, it took a long time for this to become a constitutional amendment. And that was the 73rd Amendment, all due respect to Karnataka's role in that. And I should also mention, while we're talking about Karnataka's role in this, you should mention the Institute of Social Economic Change, ISEC, in Bangalore, which is where a lot of the thinking this happened. Vinod Vyasul, who's sitting with us here, was involved in some of that thinking. This was a very, very central part of how the country learnt about Panchayat Raj. Yeah? So we are here in the womb of Panchayat Raj at the 73rd Amendment in India, which is the state of Karnataka. Right? Now, why is it that this stuff is considered unsexy? It is considered unsexy because it takes away power from people, the point that's been alluded to. It takes away power from the powerful. And people don't like having power taken away from them. Even in a village setting, yeah, what does it do when you have village democracy? What does it at the end do when it's not done well? What you have is local elites using that system of elections and so on and all the other bad stuff that goes on with elections to start extracting resources away from the public pool. Yeah? The only way of countering that is to give citizens the power to check those local elites. That is, local village citizens to check the power of local village elites. Who is capable of giving them that power? It is the state government. Because they are more powerful than the local elites. That is the power of the 73rd Amendment. It gives, and the state acts that have followed that, it gives higher levels of authority the power to give the lowest level, the local citizen, the power to check and balance their local elected leaders. Hence, we have now 2 million democracies in India where democracy works better than it does at the state and at the national level. Why? Because of the 73rd Amendment. You have Gram Sabhas. Now, they took a long time to come. The Gram Sabhas were started by Abdul Nazeer Sab in the Karnataka Mandal Commission Act. But they were placed in the 73rd Amendment. They took a long time to come into place, to sort of start actually happening. But now they're happening all over the country. You have, what is a Gram Sabha? The simple idea that at least twice a year, every villager can come into a room like this and ask questions of their elected representatives and local bureaucrats, make decisions about budgets, make village planning decisions. Yeah? Then, of course, states like Karnataka do more than that. They have something called Makla Gram Sabhas here. They have Mahila Gram Sabhas. They have all kinds of other types of Gram Sabhas going on, which are just village meetings, where ordinary citizens can make decisions that affect their own lives. What does that do? It tells you that between elections every 5 years, there is political and democratic action going on which is involving citizens. Right? I'll give you a simple example. I've done a book on Gram Sabhas called Oral Democracy. It's in that book. We were recording a Gram Sabha. This was back in 2002 in northern Karnataka somewhere. It was a period of drought. Yeah? And what happens in the Gram Sabha is you say things in the Gram Sabha you'll never dream of saying in the village otherwise. Because it is an equal space, an equalizing space. Because no politician is going to fool around the Gram Sabha because they'll lose votes, right? So they let anybody say what they want. So this was what happened. There was a drought. It was a village which was, like many villages in Karnataka, it had an incline. The upper caste lived on the higher end of the hill. The lower caste, the Dalits, lived in the lower end of the hill. Okay? So this man is complaining who's from an upper caste, meaning he was not a Dalit. He was saying, "Nam bhavilali neerilla." There was no water in their well. Huh? So Dalit man stands up and said, "Nam bhavil neeride banni." Okay. Now imagine, that is, please come to my well, there is plenty of water. Knowing fully well that this upper caste fellow is never going to come there. But he's pointing out that discrimination in that village meeting. That's just one example. You are able to say what you want, collectivize there, challenge the local, you should see how much they challenge the village president, the Adhyaksha. In Karnataka, but we did it all of South India. Challenging them on all kinds of things, on corruption, exposing, look, you cannot hide corruption in villages. Everybody knows. I have studied corruption in Karnataka Panchayats. I'm doing a book on the subject, and I will talk about it in a second. But the point of this is, everything is visible. Every act, every rupee stolen is visible. And every good thing that happens is also visible. Everything that is done is also visible. Everybody knows everything. The idea that somehow the villager is, because they're less educated, less intelligent, or less capable, I can assure you, after 30 years of working on this stuff, is complete nonsense. I'm not just saying that because I want to sound good. It's actually truly, factually complete nonsense. They're extraordinarily aware. Yeah? Let us take that awareness and turn it into development outcomes. That's simply all we have to do here. There's enormous energy. Forget the city. This can happen in cities too, and Ravi, I know, is keen on talking about that. We will. But let's do it where we already have a chance, which is in the village space. Now, how do we do that? What can we do? The big challenge of democracy all over the world is what I call the 3 Cs. What are those 3 Cs? Corruption, capture by elites, and clientelism, this vote bank business. That is really the ruination of all democracies. Yeah? Now, the fact is, this is not unique to panchayats. This is true of all democracies at every level. You're not going to see it all over the country, see it all over the world. Certainly see it in the United States, where I happen to live. How do you solve this? This, again, the 17th Amendment gives us a way. Gandhiji gave us a way, which is simply say, okay, let us give power to citizens. Let us give citizens the power to check and counter what the elites will capture, what corruption happens. And how do you do this? Now, I'm going to give you some concrete examples that come from various pieces of research that various people have done, not just me, but various people have done. I'll give you various set of sort of concrete actions that Uma has talked about, plenty of things she's doing. A lot of these things, in fact, Uma is currently trying to do. So let me just list them out. Firstly, strengthen the Gram Sabha. How do you do that? I know when Raghu was Panchayat Raj secretary, joint secretary, he was actually the secretary, he calls himself joint, but he was actually running the whole show in the government of India. His boss, well, let's not talk about him. The IAS person was his boss. But that particular idea that the Gram Sabha is where village planning should happen, that came from the People's Campaign in Kerala, bringing that to this state and to every other state. Kerala did it, they say it had 100% literacy, it had land reform, they did it at a different time. Karnataka has, in the younger generations now is close to 100% literacy. We don't have a 2021 census, but if you looked at that census, you'd probably find in the younger generations close to 100% literacy. It's time to do it here. Yeah? It will work. They may be challenged in Kalyan, Karnataka, that's all right, but it's still something we can think about doing. Yeah? How do we do it? By having local plans developed within a planning Gram Sabha and monitored over the course of the year by monitoring Gram Sabhas. And we now have mandatory Gram Sabhas twice a year. We can go back to having it 4 times a year like we did. That's a very simple process. If that is done in coordination with SAGs, women's self-help groups, as Uma pointed out, if it's done with facilitation of that planning process, that will really help things. Yeah? And that I think is something that is relatively easy to do. Gram Sabhas, by the way, are happening. When I first studied Gram Sabhas 20 years ago in Karnataka and other places, they were not happening. They were pro forma. People would check a box saying we had the Gram Sabha. But now there is no question in my mind, and everything I've done has been showing this, that they happen. Even if 20 people attend, they happen. Yeah? Nobody is trying to not make the Gram Sabha happen. So that becomes an important space because it gives us, in theory, in the practice and the theory of democracy, there are 2 types of democratic institutions. There's electoral democracy, electing representatives. So what is electoral democracy? At the end, electoral democracy is We all have diverse ideas about what we want the government to do. Let us all vote for the representative who will represent our views as closely as possible and aggregate votes, right? So that that person represents a majority point of view. It's an aggregation process. That's electoral democracy. It's adding interests, what we call adding interests. Deliberative democracy, which is what Gram Sabhas represent, is an act of persuasion. We are trying to achieve consensus. We are not adding up, we are persuading. It is, there are books written on deliberative democracy. We have the largest deliberative democracy in the world right here in India. It has never, nothing like this has ever happened in human history, where 2 million village panchayats all over the country have regular village meetings where they're engaging in deliberative democracy. Let us make it more sensible, more useful, more activated to have better outputs. It's very, very, it's such an obvious thing, and I don't know why sometimes it's hard to persuade people of this. Secondly, grievance redressal mechanisms. The simple idea that if you see something that isn't working, have a direct way of reporting that to the concerned authority and give them the power to act on it. My friend M.R. Sharan has done some research on this in Bihar and found that it has tremendous effects on improving outcomes. Yeah, so it's a simple thing that can be done. Third, one nice thing about the Panchayat Raj system is that it's, particularly the Gram Panchayat system, the village democracy thing, they're the smallest unit. Right? They consist of 3 or 4 villages with 10,000 people, which means that you can actually do something about it. You try to do something with the Bangalore Municipal Corporation or these big entities, which are very, very powerful. You can't do much. Here you can. What can you do? One of the things that Tamil Nadu has done is to have ways by which Panchayati Raj representatives and their performance is monitored and evaluated. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll tell you what they do in Tamil Nadu, what they do in Kerala to some extent. They have committees of people taking a standard score sheet format, assessing the performance of panchayats, and then grading those panchayats in ABC grades. Okay? Now, you'll say, well, we can do that. No, you can't. If you do it badly, what will happen? They'll bribe the fellow to give them a high score. How do they avoid that problem? They avoid that problem by ensuring that that committee consists of retired local bureaucrats, retired panchayat representatives, so they know how the game works very well. They're given a salary for this job, but they're always from a district very far away. They don't know anybody here, and they come unannounced, yeah, to do their assessment. And then, what recent research we've just finished shows that if the grades are done in this way, and if you reward the panchayat president who performs well, gets an A grade with a simple certificate. You just give them a certificate with a big poster saying, I am an A grade panchayat president. Their performance gets much better. They do less clientelism, less corruption. They perform better. Remarkable. It's a free little thing. What does it take? You go to one of those flex shops and you print something out. Yeah? Remarkable. Because they believe the grading and monitoring process. That's important, right? Thirdly, and this is something that's close to my heart, it really bothers me. It goes back to this idea of reflexive ways of doing development. It really bothers me that people like me get so much power. What do I mean by PhDs in economics? Okay, that's what I mean, people like me. That we are the only ones who are able to analyze data and tell you what's going on. Now, we do have some skills, we can analyze data. But quite honestly, given that at the end you have a smartphone or you're looking at various types of data all the time, you're analyzing data all the time, and you're looking at YouTube, that YouTube is telling you, you're looking at a score on Google about whether to go to a restaurant, you're analyzing data. Every citizen, because of modern technology, is able to understand data and analyze it. We don't have to rely on experts anymore. If we make that data available to citizens in a way that doesn't require a PhD in statistics to analyze it, that's the step you have to take. How do you translate the data? How do you democratize the process of data analysis in a way that the ordinary citizen can understand? That's where I think we can do a lot more work, and we need a lot of smart people who work in data visualization and UI UX kind of fields to really think about how to do this better. UI UX does it all the time with corporations. Now in America, there's a company where if you want to go to a tailor shop, you can just do it all online and set up the whole thing and make yourself a nice shirt tailored to you because of AI. Why can't we do the same thing for citizens? It's not very expensive. Yeah. So if you making data transparent, by the way, Karnataka does a very, very good job, much better than most states. if you will see in the department that Uma runs, RDPR, tax data is public. Every kind of data that you want, it's even more so, it's completely public. The problem is that you need to be pretty sophisticated to get hold of it. If that process can be simplified, so you not only get hold of it, you can play around with it, and you can see images that you can understand. You don't need, you can be illiterate but still understand to make better decisions. That will revolutionize the functioning of government, because an ordinary citizen will be able to see exactly what their panchayat representatives are doing and not doing, and check and balance them. Yeah. Now, there are a few things that I have that I will say now that not everybody will agree with, but I think they're important to consider. And two of them are Karnataka related, but related to the state itself. Firstly, and Raghu is, I know, going to jump up and shout at me, but here it is. I think Karnataka makes a mistake by having a parliamentary style democracy at the panchayat level. It needs a presidential system. Why is that? Because you cannot hold anybody accountable. It's diffused accountability in a parliamentary system. And the work we have done in northern Karnataka particularly has shown that a lot of corruption that happens around the time of choosing the Adhyaksha and the Upadhyaksha, the president, the vice president of the panchayat. Yeah? And that doesn't happen, by the way, in places like Kerala and in places like Tamil Nadu, where Kerala is a parliamentary system, but Kerala is a different story. In Tamil Nadu, which I've also looked at, or Bihar, which I've also looked at, where the president is elected directly. So I think there is more direct accountability, and they perform better for that reason. So that's one point. The second point, and Uma will not like this, is this business of 50% reservations for women. Yeah? 33% to me was the perfect. 25 was too low, which was Mandal Commission. 33 was exactly right. 50% is too much. 100% would be horrible. Why is that? We all want women to be empowered. We all want women to enter politics. We all want women leaders. Yeah? But when you go beyond 33% and turn it to 50%, you're coming to the other extreme where there is no electoral accountability. Half your seats are term limited. You see, therefore you're not rewarding or punishing a good panchayat president for good performance. They don't have a chance to run again. So what they do, when you see that happen often, they put their wives in their place or their daughters or something and make them the token representative. So I think that's all suboptimal. I think we should go back to a 33% regime. But that's my view, and I'm happy to debate it. Finally, with all of this, I mean, let me just stop to allow some time for discussion. I'll end with one more story, actually. Let me end with one more story, which is we did a study with Uma's department over COVID. What happened over COVID in Karnataka, and this is, to me, I'm very happy with the end result of this, but it took a long time. We looked entirely at data that was already available in the administrative system, in the panchayat space. Yeah? But what happened during COVID was that elections to the Gram Panchayats were postponed. Okay? It just so happened that about 200 panchayats were in a different electoral cycle because of something that happened 20 years ago in those panchayats. They were a different electoral cycle. Okay? So they didn't have the elections postponed. 200. So remember, there's 6,000 Gram Panchayats in Karnataka. 200 of them did not have the elections postponed. I mean, did not, had elected representatives because they had elections coming up much later. The rest of them, 5,800 of them had elections postponed. And what happens when elections postponed according to Karnataka law? A bureaucrat, an IS officer is put in charge, or a KS officer is put in charge of those panchayats. And they tend to be very high-level people. But you're talking about the PDO, who's the panchayat development officer, who is the main bureaucrat of the panchayat, and their dual responsibilities. They're responsible to citizens and the village council. They're also responsible to the EO, the executive officer, the IS officer in charge of them. So they're torn in different sides. Yeah? When there is an administrator in charge, they're looking to satisfy their senior in the hierarchy, very senior person. But when there's an elected panchayat in charge, they have to do both, the usual job. Yeah? This gives you the ability to test the added value of local democracy. Because a lot of these elections that were postponed, the elections where the 200 Gram Panchayats did not have their elections postponed, were in the same blocks, the same taluks as those that had their elections postponed, had administrators in charge. So we can see a direct comparison. Guess what we found? In those democratically run panchayats, you had a better match between what citizens wanted and what was delivered. You had better NREGA responsiveness. Do you remember during COVID what happened? Everybody was running back from cities to their villages because they could get NREGA money. The huge jump in demand. But what we found is in the democratically elected panchayats, there was 15% better responsiveness to that excess demand. Yeah? So overall, what you get from that is that despite all its crazy problems, and trust me, I've written many, many papers on the problems of panchayats, overall, this works better than having administrators in charge. IS officers will not like this, but it's a fact. Democracy works, particularly at the local level, and to claim that there is a democratic deficit, this is a famous word that a lot of Western political scientists throw about, that this democratic deficit in India is going through a huge democratic deficit, not at the panchayat level. It's a thriving democracy, and it is both an electoral democracy and a deliberative democracy, and it works better than the alternative. So for God's sakes, let us take advantage of that. Let us strengthen it. Let's put our time and effort into improving it instead of treating it as the backwater of development. Thanks.
Three very different talks, but they tell a story. You told us about the history of the entire process. You told us of what the reality is today.
He's asking you to speak into the mic.
And Viju has given us a broader perspective of various issues that occur and ended with a very optimistic thing that the democratic processes, when given a chance, do work. I think that's a nice conclusion to come up with. But since we don't have much time, I thought I'd open it up to some questions, then group them. Pass it, if you want one of them to answer, please say so. And I'll take about 2 or 3 minutes at the end to sum up.
But would you like to do one opening question while they get the question?
Yes, okay. One of the things that comes up is a schizophrenia in our discussion. You know, we have 2 constitutional amendments. We have urban and rural. And we talk of them in very different ways. I've spent time in Brazil, and the constitution says there's a federal government, provincial governments, and municipalities. The municipalities could be Rio de Janeiro, or it could be a 10,000-acre farm in Mato Grosso. Why is it that we have this schizophrenia about it? Would it not be better to think in terms of local governance rather than urban and rural? This is one kind of question. The second one is the debate is posed in terms of decentralization. Essentially, it is something that within the administrative structures. The difference was made out deconcentration. In the current government, the government of India is deconcentrated. There's a prime minister and a branch manager at the state level. That's a different matter. But we don't ever think in terms of federal. Raghu mentions spheres of governance. Canada thinks so, Australia, Brazil, many other countries. And if you think in terms of federal structures, local governance has a life of its own. Not the way we've done it in our constitutional amendments. So I thought these are 3 points around which maybe something could be done, some questions could be asked.
Raghu, you wanted to say something?
Okay. While they...
Yeah, first point is responding to you, Doctor. Just one thing is urban and rural. Yeah, I think it's artificial. It was done at that point in time when urban was really very small. And if you talk to Dr. Shivaramakrishnan, who was then the Urban Development Secretary, he himself will tell you that the 74th Amendment was virtually an afterthought. And what the distortion that it has caused is, I wrote a report for Kerala's Planning Board. Kerala is the fastest urbanizing state in the country. It has 950 panchayats and 50 municipalities, about 1,000. But 550 panchayats are actually urban in the census. So they are using rural institutional instruments and rural fiscal architectures to solve essentially urban problems. And I said that this is going to lead to trouble because what you're doing is you're doing a low density urbanization. People are building flats in villages, whereas what Kerala needs is actually strategic densification. So people are building flats in villages, cutting across water bodies and so on and so forth. And you will end up with an environmental disaster, which is what finally happened. So Kerala is a classic example of where this has caused so much of havoc. I did write a paper for the Justice Poonchi committee, that was in 2010 or 11, where I suggested that we should just have one level of local government. That sounds like a Laurel and Hardy. Nice. Yeah. So what I wrote in that paper was, I said that there should be just one level of local government, very similar to Norway, Sweden, etc., where I said there could be categories of local government. So Delhi would be in a category by itself, category A or whatever. All the other 65 metropolises would be category B. Category C would be all district headquarters other than the metropolises. Category E would be 6,000 odd taluka panchayats. And category E would be all the gram panchayats. So they are all at the same level. They have the same legal regime. They have different fiscal architectures because the cost of services and the basket of services which are to be delivered will be different. But sadly, that was not accepted, and my boss didn't like it, Mr. Iyer, because what Mr. Iyer said was that, listen, don't meddle with the constitutional amendment. The moment that you meddle with the constitutional amendment or suggest that there should be an amendment, sure as anything, all the anti-Panchayat Raj people will gang up together and destroy this. This has happened by an accident of politics. Leave it there. Do whatever you want, but don't suggest any change. It was mostly from a political, tactical point of view, he didn't want me to say this. But again, nothing happened out of that.
Any others? Any comments? There are some questions. Oh, there are questions? Please. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think all three presentations were very exciting, and I learned a lot by just listening to you all. And I'm very excited to hear from Uma about all the wonderful work that's been happening here. I just have one question, and it's related to cities. Why is it given all the kind of experience that everyone has gathered with panchayats over 30 years, why is it that in cities we're still looking at top down and whichever government comes into power, they want to actually not do very much about. We don't even have mayors that function. At what level? It's all there on paper. What is the problem? And can all of you do something about it?
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
First is there is a deficiency in the 74th Amendment. The 73rd Amendment has Gram Sabhas. The 74th Amendment does not have the equivalent of Gram Sabhas. A Gram Sabha is where any person, by dint of being a voter, is automatically a member of a Gram Sabha. The people's participation equivalent in the urban amendment is a wards committee. It's not even a ward committee. Some Punyatma sitting in the law ministry in Government of India made it wards committee, which means that actually you can combine 3 or 4 wards and have one committee. And the manner of representation of people in the wards committee is not by entitlement, by having a voting identity card. It is left to the states to determine. So in Karnataka, it is determined by selection, by a completely non-transparent process of selection. So that's why the corporators' favorites get selected, number one. Number two, there is indeed a difference in the participation quality in urban and rural from a priority perspective. In a rural area, your participation entitlement is defined by your residence in a village, right? In an urban area, how can your participation be simplistically defined by residence alone? Don't I have a stake in MG Road where I come to work? Are there any residents in MG Road to participate on my behalf in the wards committee? Right? So there has to be probably a different definition of interest group participation. There has to be commuters participating in the transportation network, which cannot be area based, and so on and so forth. So urban participation is actually a huge deficiency. Second thing, and particularly about Karnataka, in Karnataka, the Panchayat Raj Act is one of the best in the country today. And I say this on the authority of having actually examined it and also being a bit of a drafting person and a lawyer myself. If you look at the Gram Sabha, the content of the Gram Sabha articulation, it has progressively improved from Abdul Nazeer Sab's time. There were 46 amendments made to it in 2003, where my fabulous minister, Mr. M.Y. Gorpade, guided me through the process. Again, joint select committee, all party consensus. And then we had the Gram Swaraj Act of 2016, which is really, I would say that our Gram Sabha provisions are better structured than the ones in Kerala, which is why the quality of participation is improving, because you have the legal enabled. In contrast to that, the State Urban Municipal Corporations Act is a damn mess. I have a research paper on that and I can send it to you. It's a chaotic act with layers and layers and layers of sections added to it, diffusing the functions, creating a completely confusing people's participatory process. It has provisions relating to smallpox, which have not been removed from the act. It's an old act. It really requires a complete overhaul. And you did some work on it, but I don't know whether the government has actually taken the best suggestions into it. And I think the government has a vested interest in urban chaos. That's where you make the money. Gram Panchayat corruption is all peanut stuff. This is where why do you have a minister for Bangalore development? I rest my case.
I have a question for you, which is that, what is that? Listening to him, I've lost it. I'll come back. Anybody else?
I have two questions and maybe half of a comment. I'm Akash, I'm a graduate student in anthropology at the University of Toronto. One is sort of, I guess, an implementation question, which is that what would be, say, an instrument of change for, say, for example, a state like Jharkhand? Is there an element of risk-taking that's required on part of the state government and openness on part of the IAS? Because because of my sort of interviews with district collectors and so on, I often see this limit that it can happen in Kerala, it can happen in the Crescent that you mentioned, but it can't happen in Jharkhand. There is a sort of closeness to the idea. What is sort of the role of risk-taking into sort of going, sort of like plunging ahead? Because the interesting point about Jharkhand is that it's one of the only Adivasi government in a place, but it's struggling in terms of, in the sense that it continues its sort of Bihar era administration. The second was a question, perhaps a bit on the academic side, which is a little more of a deeper reflection on the role of technology and data in terms of pushing back against the decentralizing attempts that have been going on, in terms of what the specific elements of database technology does, all the way from Aadhaar and onwards, right? For example, and I've been in conversation with Umama about it, why is it that MWCD wants to design an Android application there and say Bangalore could do it, Bombay could do it, and so on and so forth. Yeah, thank you.
Let's see if you can.
Can I respond to this?
Okay.
So on the Jharkhand story, I've done a fair amount of work in Bihar. I started working in Bihar in 2007 and I stopped around 2017. So I spent 10 years working on Bihar, working largely on SHGs, but also on panchayats. There's no question in my mind that even in those 10 years, Bihar substantially improved. Yeah? And I mentioned my friend M.R. Sharan, who continues to work in Bihar. It's improved even more. Yeah? So, I mean, it lags behind Karnataka, but in its own trajectory, it's gotten much better. Yeah? Friends of mine who work in Maharashtra, friends of mine who work in Rajasthan, friends of mine who work in Himachal say the same kind of thing, right? So I think every state is a lot better than it used to be, with the one exception of southern Andhra Pradesh. That's because there's a long history in Andhra Pradesh of undermining the 73rd Amendment that continues to this day, right? So, I think Jharkhand, looking at Bihar, will be seeing the innovations there. They have in the SHG movement, and I'm sure in the Panchayat movement, and the convergence between SHGs and Panchayats. So I think it's a matter of time, but it will happen there. The technology question, we're in the era of surveillance capitalism. We know that, right? All data is centripetal. I mean, that's the nature of data. Satya Nadella, I think, called it the new oil or something. And so there's a lot of money to be made. And governments are using data largely to control and to manipulate and all this kind of thing, which is why you have this whole new paternalistic thing that's become so sexy and everybody's getting very excited by it. Because it gives people the sense that they can play God. Yeah? I'm going to figure this out scientifically because a Nobel Prize winner has told me this is the way to do it, so I'm going to fix things to make it better. Yeah? The citizen part of this is far more messy. It's far more difficult to do. Yeah? In the sense that funders don't come to it easily. Yeah? A funder wants big impact. A funder doesn't want small impact. So it's difficult to find funding for it. But if AI can be used to turn something like a smartphone into a user-friendly device, if data can be used to make sure that you get to watch the YouTube video that you want to watch at any given moment at any given time, if data can be used so that you can decide which restaurant you want to go to on the basis of crowdsourcing opinions about that restaurant, data can certainly be used to make citizens more effective consumers and monitors of government action. There's a lot of critique of human-centered design. Bangalore's again been a big center of human-centered design, so let's not use that language. But to make sure that the end user, who is in this case the average citizen who may have, say, a 7th class pass level of education.
The Johnson why.
Yeah, but there are many examples of developing technology to make that happen. Now, when I happened to meet in Delhi the chap who's in charge of the Government of India's technology center, who's developing all these apps, he's, I think, not unsympathetic, but, there is an engineering mindset that doesn't quite understand the bottom-up perspective. Because you see everything as a machine. I'm reading a beautiful book on the distinction between left brain and right brain. It's all left brain stuff. Yeah. So all this left brain stuff is forgetting that the right brain, in effect, controls the left brain. That's what the neuroscientists tell us. So why don't we make that happen in the way we develop apps? In the way we develop more user-friendly forms of consuming data. It's just people don't work on it. And some do. There are notable exceptions, but many more could. So the answer is yes, it can happen. It just requires people to, some years ago, I did a podcast for the Cultural Anthropology Association, which I slammed anthropologists for spending all their time doing critique, rather than working on this kind of thing. Yeah. So you guys who write, this is bad and that is bad and everything is a social construction, help develop these apps. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Vinod, you can summarize.
Okay. It's very difficult to sum up this kind of a discussion, but I leave it with some of the open questions we asked. Why the schizophrenia? Why a term like Panchayat, Government of India, Government of Karnataka, Panchayat of Rampura? Why not Government of Rampura? Is it othering them using language? There are some of these questions that are very important. And finally, the question for you was, in 2004, Karnataka passed the Local Bodies Fiscal Accountability Act. But as far as I know, that's not really been operationalized. No?
I lost my job on that.
Okay. I think it's a good point to stop. We have run out. There's a lot to talk about.
I'll tell you the story.
Okay. I think that we should end it now.
Okay.
Thank you very much for all of
Can I tell you the story? Can I tell you the story? Okay. You see, Karnataka was in fiscal stress. So they decided to take what is it called, that budgetary support loan from the World Bank? Okay. So there's structural adjustment loan. They have this. That's why World Bank consultants get paid, to make simple things sound complex. So the loan was given. It's an untied fund. Okay. So there was a finance secretary, great Atma, very bright. Good friend, I'll tell you who it was. So then he says, last minute, there was one Australian consultant as part of the World Bank team. He was one Shane Warne type of spin bowler. So he was not doing anything. So the best way to be important is to obstruct something. So he said, listen, we are giving so much of money to the state, and this state has devolved so much of money, and all the devolution is shown as a revenue deficit. So you must have Fiscal Responsibility Act. So, and the whole thing was that there was some coordination issue. That day, the proposal was supposed to be approved in cabinet, and J.H. Patel, CM, was supposed to traipse off to Delhi and sign the agreement and all that. And now it cannot be done. The World Bank people say it cannot be done. So they drafted this. I think it won the Olympic record for the fastest drafted act. Okay. And it was placed before assembly, and J.H. Patel said, Adile, madbekappa, that's ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡಿ, ನಾನು ಈ flight ಹಿಡಿಬೇಕು. And they did it. It's not an act. It's a love letter. It is You may please be fiscally responsible. You may please take all efforts to be nice. You must please ensure that there will be this and that. So it was done. Then it was taken to Delhi. Everybody signed. J.H. Patel got a photograph in Deccan Herald, and then that whole thing was put into the shredder. Ashte.
On that note, thank you so much.
On that happy note.